Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to Macro. We're going to walk through some information from Chapter 10. So today is May the 29th. This will serve as our recording for the week. Your discussion questions are already posted for the week, and they have to do with fiscal policy, which is the amount of money that the government spends and the taxation that it imposes and what it does with that money. So we're going to kind of regress a little bit, though, and walk through Chapter 10. There were some questions about Chapter 10 and the information that was covered. The quiz over Chapter 10 is still open on Apple, so that'll give you some time to go back and rework some questions if you still have them. Thank you all for keeping up with your reading. You all seem to be doing well. When we walk through Chapter 10, the thing that we talk about here is aggregate expenditure and aggregate demand. We look at aggregate supply and aggregate demand as the amount of stuff that's being bought and sold in the economy as a whole. And this is all dependent on income. So whenever we talk about income, when we talk about jobs, this is really, really important. Probably the biggest thing that'll come up in the election this year is what's going to happen with jobs and what's going to happen with unemployment. Unemployment numbers can be really skewed based on income. The easiest way to employ more people is to pay them less, which will obviously come up. The difference in candidate salaries will be part of this. So when we talk about aggregate income, it's a big thing. So whenever we talk about that, we have the total amount of money that's earned is called aggregate income, and that's for all people working in the U.S. And that's for all people working in the U.S., whether they should be here or should not be here, if they're legal or illegal, if they're temporary, whatever, they all are a part of that. We have some problems with leakage when they send money back home, but that's really a different problem for a different chapter. When we get to aggregate expenditure, when we get to consumption, we have lots of parts of this, and they all kind of start to look alike after a while. So we're going to walk you through each piece of it and talk about what they do, and then walk you through the formula that's in your book. The first thing that you have is consumption. This is just stuff that you buy. When you go to Walmart and you buy stuff, that's consumption spending. Typically, we break apart consumer durables and non-durables, and you'll see these numbers come up on the news from time to time. Non-durables would be stuff that you buy and use up, toothpaste, toilet paper, bananas, stuff like that. And you'll have non-durable goods, then you'll have durable goods, which are things like TVs and washing machines, assets that you tend to keep in your house for a year or more, but they're still consumable goods because ultimately consumers are buying them. The next thing that you have is autonomous investment. Lots of things go into the investment pool. The most simple thing we think about is people who invest in stocks or people who buy stocks. We can have investments in real estate. We can have investments in bonds. We can have investments in private industry. We can have lots of different things. The important thing here is it's money that we didn't spend on stuff. Okay, so when we talk about consumption, this is stuff that we buy. When we talk about investment, this is money that we didn't buy stuff with. We could have put it in the bank, could have put it in the stock market. It's all investment. Okay. The other thing that we have are government purchases. We're going to assume that the government is going to purchase more, or that it's going to purchase stuff with the budget that it has, and we don't have any bleeding and we don't have any crowding out, which happens when we have a budget deficit, which is probably the most important issue, in my opinion, with the election coming up. It'll be talked about a lot. I'm not just sure that a lot will happen with it. I'll give you my thoughts on that later on and towards the end of the semester. And then the final thing that you have is net exports, the amount of stuff that we're bringing in versus the amount of stuff that we're sending out. And a lot of things affect net exports. One of the things right now is how strong the dollar is, okay, or how weak the dollar is, I should say. It's really cheap to buy U.S. goods in Japan right now, and the inverse is true. It's really expensive to buy Japanese goods in the United States right now. Part of that has to do with exchange rates, or a lot of that has to do with exchange rates. So, anyway, the thing to think about there is how much stuff we bring in versus stuff that we take out. We know that when we talk about finished goods, or you should know that we are a net importer. We bring in more stuff than we send out as far as consumable goods or finished goods. However, when we talk about investment, we send out lots more investment funds than we bring in. we go around the world and invest in China and Japan much more than China and Japan come to the United States and invest here. So, and then we have a problem with this in a real economy in that we have taxes which are larger than the budget. We're taking in more in taxes than they're spending. Actually, the inverse is true. They're spending more than the taxes that they're taking in. So, with this, we end up with a formula for aggregate expenditure. All we do is we take each one of these things and add them together. Okay? And with this, we end up with a line that's called the aggregate expenditure line, and it's planned spending in it so that we can measure how much we have in real GDP. You'll hear a lot of talk the next 3 or 4 months about how candidates plan to balance the budget and what they plan to do with taxes. And their plans will be greatly different, and you'll hear lots of debate on this. One of the reasons that they're different is because we don't know how to handle planned expenditure. And we think we know what people are going to spend, but we don't know for sure. Okay? Great example of this is Japan. That's the case that's in your book. Whenever interest rates go down, people tend to spend more money. Whenever income goes up, people tend to spend more money. That's not the case in Japan. Interest rates go down and down and down. Income goes up and up and up. People still save all their money. We'll talk about saving and spending in a minute. But we have to have spending in order to expand the economy. Thus, last week's discussion question. Okay, we have lots of things going on in the economy to help stimulate it, and we don't always have the spending that we want. Back several years ago when George Bush was president, he cut taxes in the middle of the year, and almost everyone in the United States got a check for $600. The reason they did that was so they would spend the money. Okay? Anyway, the slope of this line is our marginal propensity to consume. It's how likely we are to buy stuff. Okay? And where that these two lines cross, we're going to end up with something that's real GDP. Okay? It's the amount of aggregate output that's a component of real GDP. GDP is gross domestic product. We've already talked about that. It's the amount of stuff that is finished goods that we produce. We have some things that we're not sure if they're part of GDP or not. It's kind of hard to measure. For example, Firestone makes tires. If you go to Sam's or you go to Walmart and you buy those tires, those are a component of GDP. However, if you go buy a car, the tires that are on that car in themselves are not a component of GDP. The whole car is. So whenever we talk about what real GDP is, we have some problems with that. But ultimately, we have to figure out what's going to happen with the money that we take in and how much of it we're going to spend in order to determine GDP. Okay? So if spending is more than GDP, we're going to see that show up first of all in inventories. You'll see numbers come out once a month that have to do with inventory levels in the United States. And if inventory levels in the United States are below where people thought they would be, that's considered a good thing. It means that we've bought more stuff than we thought we were going to buy. Okay? If inventory is higher, or if GDP is higher than spending, then we're going to have increases in inventories, and people are going to have stuff sitting on their shelves or sitting in their warehouses. Okay, the result of that is an increase in unemployment, okay, and a decrease in spending. It can also ultimately affect prices, depending on what the goods are that we're buying. If you have a decrease in spending on things that are going to rot, like bananas, okay, the price is always going to go down because we have a surplus. So with that, whenever we spend more than people think we're going to spend, it's going to shift the demand line out. Okay, we're going to have a reduction in inventories, and we should start to produce more. Because we started to produce more, we've increased investment spending, we've increased output because of an increased input, and we should start to move to equilibrium, and eventually we're going to produce too much. Okay, whenever that happens, we're going to have an increase in inventory. With this, we have a simple multiplier. That's 1 minus your marginal propensity to consume is equal to 1 divided by your marginal propensity to save. Okay, whenever we look at this, we take the amount of activity in the economy and we multiply it by this multiplier. Okay, the only thing we can do with money is save it or spend it. The only reason we save it is because we want to spend it later. Okay, we also have some problems when we talk about demand, when we talk about price. Whenever prices go up, we have decreased consumption. Okay, we tend to have a higher investment rate, and we have a decrease in net exports. Okay, this is why it's important for the Fed or whoever to keep inflation in check. Likewise, whenever we have a decrease in prices, we have an increase in spending and an increase in real GDP. Okay, this is one of the reasons that people are talking about oil prices so much. We see oil is inelastic. We're going to put gas in our cars no matter what happens. Okay, the more gas we put in our cars, the less we're going to spend on other stuff. Okay, when we spend less on other stuff, or we have less money to invest, it's going to decrease GDP. Okay, and finally, the thing to understand is no matter what happens, is this line's always shifting. We're going to shift the aggregate expenditure line whenever we shift prices, and we're going to shift aggregate expenditure line whenever we have changes in consumption patterns. Okay, if for some reason we start saving more money, one of the things that will make you start saving more money is if we have a decreased tax on savings. Okay, so if they were to increase the IRA contribution for the year, we'd actually have an increase in investment spending and a decrease in consumption. Okay, so all these things go together. My whole point to this is to get you to understand that it doesn't matter what you do with the money, you're going to either save it or spend it, provided that you have the money. Ultimately, investment money in the economy is going to make the economy expand more over a long period of time than basic consumption is. Okay, that's why that it's important to keep this in balance, and that's why it's important that we keep a positive savings rate. In the United States, several years ago, we had a savings rate of about negative 4%. It's back to being a positive about 2.5% now. Okay, which is about a healthy number. They would really like for it to be around 3. One of the ways that you get it to go up, like I said, is to affect taxes on the money that you save. You incent people to save by decreasing their taxes. Anyway, I hope that this helps you understand the information in Chapter 10. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. I'm at home right now. I had surgery on Tuesday, so I'm recording this from my house right now. But you can always call me on my cell phone. You can always shoot me an email, and I'll be happy to help however I can. Thanks.